Will Russia attack the U.S. power grid? I can't even believe I'm saying those words, but that's the situation that we're in today.
Physical attack on critical transformers could trigger cascading blackouts.
It was actually a very shocking result to us that there's very few number of substations you need to take out in the entire United States to knock out the entire grid.
Knock out the entire grid?
That's correct.
How many would it take to knock out putting the entire country in a blackout?
Less than 20.
The report was leaked to the Wall Street Journal. It found the U.S. could suffer a coast-to-coast blackout if saboteurs knocked out just 9 substations. High-voltage transformers at the Metcalf Power Substation. Security cameras captured bullets hitting the chain-link fence.
They knew what they were doing. They had a specific objective. They wanted to knock out the substation.
At the time, John Wellinghoff was chairman of FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, a small government agency with jurisdiction over the U.S. high-voltage transmission system.
Could have brought down all Silicon Valley.
We're talking Google, Apple, all these guys.
Yes, that's correct.
Who do you think this could have been?
Security alert has been issued by the FBI, the NSA, National Security Agency, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Energy. This is a big, urgent joint security alert just released tonight, and it's a technical alert, so I'm not going to quote from it too much directly because it's all this technical stuff, but the AP, I thought, summed it up well. They described this alert as, quote, warning of the discovery of malicious cyber tools that the agency said are capable of gaining full system access to multiple industrial control systems here in the United States and in North America. In other words, the U.S. government tonight is urgently warning that someone, they're not saying who, but presumably Russia, has deployed malicious weapons that could shut down U.S. infrastructure. Specifically, they say this thing is targeted at energy infrastructure in North America. To get more specific than that, it is reportedly targeted at liquefied natural gas facilities and our electrical grids.
California energy officials on Friday issued a sober forecast for the state's electrical grid. They're saying now it lacks sufficient capacity to keep the lights on this summer and beyond if heat waves and wildfires or other extreme events take their toll. May I just ask Californians, do you actually think that heat waves and wildfires are unexpected extreme events? Because as an outsider, it seems like every summer we go through this. And when I say we go through this, you go through this. And that would be Jack Bear, the CEO of MISO. He came out yesterday and he said, as we move forward, know that when you put a solar panel or a wind turbine up, it's not the same as a thermal resource like coal or gas. He says the issue on the rise throughout the country and all throughout the West is many traditional and nuclear power plants are being retired to make way for the renewable sources of energy. But the plants are being turned off faster than the renewable energy and battery storage can keep up. John, did you say that? Come on. I thought you were smarter than this. Matty, I mean, it's pretty logical. Wouldn't it be nice if we had both? If we had the solar and the wind, and we kept that nuclear power plant running just in case we need it. Of course, that'll never happen because there's never a need for it. There's never a spike because of a heat wave or a forest fire or a mudslide or an earthquake. It'll never happen. Why keep the other power plant running very low so you could crank it if you needed it?
That's an interesting question. All I know is that All of this talk has convinced me even more to fully convert our economy to electric cars. Because what
could possibly go wrong?
Right, with California.
You know what kills me is Elon Musk is even coming out going, we can't do this, stop it. I mean, he's the guy he's leading the charge. He's the guy that has become the richest guy in the world for pushing this stuff. And he's even like, slow down.
Even he's saying, hey, we may need to develop our fossil fuels for the near future, considering the global economic consequences and problems that we're having with energy.
So, has been raised by some stakeholders that high-altitude EMP could damage a large portion of the North American electric grid, resulting in significant damage to assets and long-term blackout, possibly lasting months or longer. Electromagnetic pulse that is created when a nuclear weapon is detonated high above the Earth's surface. The height at which the weapon would be typically detonated, the so-called height of burst, can range from 30 kilometers to 500 kilometers or higher. However, in order to generate significant weapon effects from all three components, i.e. E1, E2, and E3, the height of burst is typically 100 kilometers or higher above the Earth's surface. Line of sight. A high-altitude nuclear burst can illuminate a very large region, essentially a line of sight from the burst location. The exposed regions for the given burst heights from a nuclear burst over the central U.S. would extend across the continent, beyond the east and west coasts, and outside of our borders to the north and south. EMP event is referred to as an E3 waveform. There are two components to the E3 wave. One is referred to as the blast wave, or E3A, and the second is called the heave wave, for E3B. The blast wave is created within the first 10 seconds after the nuclear blast, and is a result of the expanding fireball. The second component, the E3B heave wave, is generated by the heaving of air heated by the nuclear explosion. The change in geomagnetic field resulting from the E3A and E3B waves induces low-frequency, quasi-DC currents in the power grid, much like those generated by a severe geomagnetic disturbance event, but are significantly larger and of much shorter duration. The total duration of the E3A and E3B signals is on the order of 4 to 5 minutes. E3 has two potential impacts. 1. Voltage collapse due to increased reactive power consumption and misoperation of protection systems due to harmonics. And 2. Additional hotspot heating in transformers.
In 1989, there was a small geomagnetic storm that knocked out Quebec's power grid for 9 hours. The U.S. also detonated an experimental high-altitude nuclear weapon above the Pacific Ocean, causing effects in Hawaii about 900 miles away. But
concern is that with EMP warfare, there is a strong incentive to attack first, because the initial blow can be crippling. The first striker has a huge advantage. This makes EMP strategy more like cyber warfare than Cold War nuclear strategy. During the Cold Conflict, the U.S. and the USSR relied on the principle of mutually assured destruction. Neither was reckless enough to launch a nuclear attack on the other because it would result in a devastating counterattack. This logic may not work with EMP attacks if the initial strike is sufficiently ruinous.
Funny happened. The opposite of what all of these businesses and economists predicted happened. Demand exploded. People bought things like crazy, and now supply chains are choking on that record demand. Everyone has had the experience of not being able to get something, and everyone has had the experience of paying more for something. Prior to the pandemic, most of us just took it for granted that we could get things ever faster. E-commerce made it seem like Everything was right at our doorstep. But that obscures what was a 14,000-mile journey halfway around the world. It took months. And when you add up all the automation, all the algorithms, all of the hundreds of people who had to touch those goods or transport them in some way, it's in total one of the most complicated endeavors that human beings ever engage in. And yet it happens millions of times per day. And we take it for granted because all of that has been rolled behind this ultimate convenience of just one-click e-commerce shopping. But the pandemic showed us just how unsustainable and unrealistic that expectation is.
President Zelensky warns of a global food crisis if Russia continues to block Ukraine's main ports, which export agricultural products around the world.
Apparently crashed at a General Mills plant, a food plant in Covington, Georgia. 6 tractor trailers were reportedly on fire. You're seeing pictures from the scene right now. This is the second time in a week something like this has happened. On April 14th, the plane crashed into the Gem State Processing in East Idaho. What's going on here? Well, the story gets weirder. Food processing plants all over the country seem to be catching fire. A couple of days ago, a fire destroyed the headquarters of Azure Standard, one of the largest organic food distributors in the country. At the end of last month, a fire severely damaged a fresh onion packing facility in South Texas. In Oregon, a potato chip processing plant to support a boiler explosion that sent workers to the hospital. Here's a news report on that.
Eastern Oregon, where crews are battling a major fire at a potato chip processing plant. Air 12 flew over the scene at Shearer's Foods on Highway 207 in Hermiston. We're told the fire was caused by an explosion of a portable boiler there. 2 people were taken to the hospital.
So industrial accidents happen, of course, but this is a lot of industrial accidents at food processing facilities at the same time the president's warning us about food shortages. They're getting hit by planes and catching fire. What is going on here exactly? Jason Rantz hosts a radio show in Seattle and joins us to put it into perspective. Jason, good to see you.
Good to see you. Yeah, obviously when something happens every so often, you obviously hope that there's no significant damage and certainly no one gets hurt, but you kind of write it off. It's not that big of a deal. Accidents happen. But when you've got well over a dozen food processing plants and warehouses getting destroyed or seriously damaged over just the last few weeks, at a time when the food supply is already vulnerable, it's obviously suspicious, and it could lead to serious food shortages. That's why some folks are now wondering, well, number one, what's going on? And you've got some people speculating that this might be an intentional way to disrupt the food supply.
Wait, can I ask you to pause there really quick? Can I just ask you, I just want to nail this down so our viewers understand. There have been confirmed over a dozen disabling accidents at food plants in the last month, over a dozen.
Absolutely, and we're talking about some really significant plants. The Taylor Farms facility in Salinas, California was completely destroyed by a fire last week. We've had 2 major potato processing plants in Belfast, Maine and Warden, Washington that were completely gutted, which is happening at a time where we already have a potato shortage globally. You were talking about the onion supply at that Rio Fresh, but it's not just produce plants. Last month there was a fire that took out a Nestle food plant out in Jonesboro, Arkansas, and that's impacting frozen food brands like Hot Pockets or Stouffer's, which maybe you might buy if you can't get fresh food from a warehouse that just exploded. And that Shearer's Food facility you just mentioned in the open, I mean, that's the only West Coast facility that they operate. So there is some significant concern, of course, that this is going to impact the supply chain. Now, to be clear, the timing is very suspicious. It's obviously concerning. Police are saying that these fires are due to faulty issues with equipment, so they're not saying that this was intentional. Either way, it's obviously going to have some significant, implications in us getting our food.
Yeah, I mean, an hour ago, a plane crashed into a General Mills facility. We don't even.
For one. Most of the preparation is very similar to preparing for any other kind of power outage. You'd want to have a stock of canned food and bottled water, battery-powered flashlights and lots of batteries, a battery-powered radio, plenty of warm blankets, under the assumption that your heating system will be knocked out as well, hand-powered tools, especially can openers for all your canned food, and other basic survival tools, such as a first aid kit. You'll also want to have spare fuel and replacement items for your car.